It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome into another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Alan, I found myself actually humming along that time, and I almost went straight past the intro into this humming still. But Alan, how are you doing?
It's good. It feels like it's a renegade-y day. I don't know. I'm into it.
Maybe it's like we need. Oh, you know what? We should have seen if we could have gotten just like a little bit of a holiday version updated too, just for this special episode right before Christmas.
Maybe.
Yeah, but no, you know what? The original's too good. You can't mess with a good thing.
I'm trying to envision what it would sound like with that super old school kind of Fender guitar kind of sound you get with maybe Rocking Around the Christmas Tree or Run Run Rudolph, that real old school twangy electric guitar. I don't know. It could be interesting.
You get the wheels spinning here.
Yeah, for sure.
Alan, I don't know that it's crazy that we haven't touched on it yet this week, but we were talking before we started recording, and you mentioned and I'm sure other people brought it up, but you look at where the Steelers were at and where the Bengals were at when they just met a few weeks ago, and the Steelers arguably having their best offensive performance other than on the scoreboard. A lot of people had a lot of hope with what they did moving the ball. Kenny played arguably start to finish his best game. There were a lot of good things to take away from that game other than the amount of points that the Steelers put up on the board. Now, since then, them and the team that they played, the Cincinnati Bengals, have gone in complete opposite directions. They figured things out. They found a game plan that works for Jake Browning, a recipe for success for him, and have gone on a nice little run. And the Steelers have just totally collapsed, losing 3 straight games. 2 of those to definitely inferior opponents, and then the Indianapolis Colts, who are also playing a backup quarterback, and 2 of those at home. Yes, yeah. I cannot stress enough, Arizona and New England, 2-win teams, were both also at Acrisure Stadium. So, I think it's important to bring up, too, the last time that these guys met was not that long ago, and how different things look now, just a few weeks later.
They really are quite different. I mean, not just for the Steelers either. This is a very different Bengals team in terms of the way it feels, the mood around it. Look, I mean, they were having a struggle of a year to begin with, even when Joe Burrow was healthy. Then he gets hurt, and you kind of think, here comes the white flag, right? And it didn't happen, and I think part of that is that they've gotten really good play out of Jake Browning, but I think a lot of it is just a testament to the leadership in that locker room, the coaching that they're getting. I asked Mike Tomlin this question on Monday. I was like, why have the Bengals been able to have so much success with Jake Browning? I find it very unlikely that this guy, who was an undrafted free agent, never really thought of as much of a pro prospect, has been available for basically anyone to sign for 4 seasons, is actually very good. And I'm not talking about he's been good as a backup. I'm talking about his numbers as a backup are among the best of any quarterback in the NFL this year. I find it very hard to believe that Jake Browning is actually a Pro Bowl quarterback. I think it's much more likely that the Bengals are doing a really, really, really good job of putting him in positions to succeed. And at the same token, when the Steelers go from Kenny Pickett to Mitch Trubisky, which we've seen not to be that significant of a talent drop-off, if any, honestly, and they get worse with Mitch Trubisky, and significantly worse, I think it really exposes some failures in the Steelers' coaching and their leadership and the way they go about their business, that the drop-off from Kenny Pickett to Mitch Trubisky sank the Steelers' season, and the Bengals have been better with Jake Browning than they were with Joe Burrow.
Yeah, these are 2 independent thoughts that popped in my head as you were talking. I don't want to steer this conversation a different direction, but they just popped in my mind. Jake Browning, what's going on right now, almost kind of reminds me, because I could see us going into this offseason, all of a sudden the team is willing to bring him in and give him a different opportunity. If you remember when Andy Dalton was hurt and AJ McCarron was their starter, and Cleveland tried to trade a 2nd round pick for him, I'm just picturing
maybe a bit before your time, but Scott Mitchell filled in for Dan Marino one year with the Miami Dolphins, and they won 10 or 11 games, and then the Lions gave him a huge contract to be their starter the next year, and was horrendous This was like late in Marino's career. But Scott Mitchell is, to me, will always be the sort of poster. Also played for the Bengals later in his career. But yeah, 1993, Scott Mitchell played 7 games in relief of Dan Marino, and had an 84 passer rating. And they won 3 of their 4 games, but the Dolphins were pretty good that year. And then he went on to be the starter for the Detroit Lions and was miserable for most of the next 5 years.
Well, so, yeah, I don't know who he is, so
that's the lesson there, right? Is that like here's the other thing. It's like, if you traded Jake Browning for Mitch Trubisky at the end of that game 4 weeks ago, does the result of any of these games in between change? Like, do the Steelers have more success with Jake Browning? Do the Bengals have less with Trubisky? Or is it really not that much about the individuals and about the scheme, the coaching, the X's and O's, and the culture of the locker room, that the Bengals have been able to overcome this and, in fact, thrive in this situation where the Steelers have failed? Like, I don't feel like Jake Browning would be the answer to all the Steelers' problems right
now. No, and I think that's kind of what's gotten exposed about the Steelers by everybody else around the league. The other real quick independent thought that I had was, I'm almost happier about this happening because I had the worst nightmare when this all started to happen with the Bengals, that they end up with like a top 8-ish pick and end up with like Brock Bowers on their team or something like that and are better long-term for it. So I would rather have them win some games here. Now, I obviously don't want them as a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers to go on some playoff run or anything like that. But this to me is more palatable than them ending up with like a Brock Bowers on that roster.
That's also been an interesting thought. I actually think this version of the Bengals is pretty likable from like a neutral fan standpoint. Like, I think Joe Burrow is very easy to root for. T. Higgins,
as individuals,
those are exciting players that like dude, that catch T. Higgins made last week, like even in the press box where you're talking about like battle hardened, for lack of a better term, like guys that don't react to anything that happens in a football game. Like, I was sitting in the press box in Indianapolis when that happened, and there were like audible reactions to that catch from T. Higgins. It was like, oh man, like, and nobody in the Indianapolis Pittsburgh press box cares about the Bengals. It was just an incredible play. I think they're fun to watch. Joe Mixon, maybe not so easy to get behind, but So, but anyway, no, I mean, I think. Yeah, like, dude, when that happened, I was like, oh, the Bengals, they're going to lose T. Higgins in free agency and replace him with Marvin Harrison. Like that was exactly what I saw happening. Like, that they were going to get to like top 5 in the draft and end up, right there. So, I mean, I guess it's good for the Steelers in a big picture, but I think it really exposed some significant flaws that, like, Kenny Pickett was holding a lot of things together with this offense that have since fallen apart.
Yeah, and you talk about that, like, falling apart. It just seems like each week something's going on with the Steelers more than just the results of football games. Now, you can say that maybe, heightens the conversation, makes it louder, and things start to snowball when you're not winning football games. That's very true. But there's things other than the results that are going on with the Steelers. But if you look at it, Alan, what I think is interesting is it's pretty much all about the offense, right? I mean, or at least mostly it is about the offense of this team. When you talk about a lack of leadership, I don't think you have that on the defensive side of the ball. The defense also, like, if you're talking about production, and all your star powers on the defensive side of the football. So I think that's an interesting conversation to have too, is just like most of the Steelers' problems, really, coaching, personnel, all these things come from the offensive side of the football.
Yeah, I don't think it's really I think it's an interesting conversation because I think a lot of this gets like thrown on Mike Tomlin, and I think at the end of the day, he's responsible for it. But I also feel like on defense, there's a significant group of individuals that both played. So, Cam Heyward obviously is like this anchor to the Steelers' past, right? Where he played with guys that were on Super Bowl teams, right? He played with, some of the guys that are in the Hall of Fame are going to end up there. And TJ Watt came in at the end of that, but certainly played with guys that played with, and lots of them. And then you also have guys that did not have that connection, but are just on their own incredible individuals that have awesome leadership capabilities. Guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, Alex Highsmith, Patrick Peterson, right? Where like these aren't guys that have this specific attachment to the Steelers past, but are just, in my mind, remarkable people in terms of their knowledge, approach to the game, fundamentals, all these things. And so, I think when you have that synergy, right, where you have this attachment and then you add the right people, I think that's what provides a really strong team dynamic. And look, I think the Steelers defense has that. Like, I don't think there's this huge divide in the way I think about the culture and the personalities and the buy-in of the Steelers defense as I do the offense. It's like they're almost different teams, like where like one is everything you would want it to be, and the other is, well, maybe not nothing that you would want it to be, but certainly not even close. And I think that you can sort of see that, like, that's a long-term problem, right? Like, you can't have a connection to the 2010 Steelers if you don't have a player that was on the 2010 Steelers, right? Like, that's obvious. But, like, the problem is that the Steelers did not, in those drafts at that time, like, Cam Heyward is still here. TJ Watt is still here. Why are there no offensive players from that era still on this team? Well, it's because they weren't good. Like that, like this is a problem that is over a decade in the making, right? Where like you don't just show up in 2023 and say, man, we don't have enough leaders here. Like you don't have enough leaders in 2023 because when you drafted Cam Heyward, the rest of the class was Marcus Gilbert. Well, you know, like he's not here anymore. Like, you know, like there's been years and years. And look, Cam has had an exceptionally long career, but the guys that you would think like, okay, where are my 10-year vets? Where are my 8-year vets? Where are the bulk of the guys that should be the leaders and the connections to previous teams? Let me just go through the Steelers drafts of that time. Le'Veon Bell, wrong personality, and not here anymore, obviously. But like none of these guys. Marcus Wheaton, Landry Jones, like where was the guy that was supposed to be Dree Archer, Martavius Bryant? Like where? I mean, okay, Shazier gets hurt, can't do anything about that. Sammy Coates, Jesse James, like there's no. Not only did they not work out, Gerald Hawkins, like there wasn't even like Juju, like that James Conner. I guess maybe that class is the first place where you have some like hope that maybe they could have got it right enough that those guys would still be here. And really, honestly, it's mostly about injuries and salary cap that those guys aren't. And maybe they could have been the leaders this team needs, but I mean, the reason that defense doesn't have a Cam Heyward or the Steelers offense doesn't have a Cam Heyward and a TJ Watt is that the Steelers didn't draft an offensive version of Cam Heyward and TJ Watt. Like the leadership problem is the same problem as the talent problem. Like it's the same thing. And then when you look at the offensive guys that they've added, they traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick. They added Peterson as a free agent, Highsmith in the draft. Have any of the Steelers' offensive signings over the last 2 years come in here and shown the kind of high-level acumen, leadership, personal responsibility, dedication, humble, humility that those three guys have? Any you can put the entire pile of the Steelers' offensive additions since 2010, and you don't get three guys like that. Like they don't exist.
Right. So, I mean, from that standpoint, we've talked a lot about the coaching failures on the offensive side of the football. Does it even go beyond that though, to like an evaluation of the offensive side of the football?
Yeah. I mean, both an evaluation of and dedicating resources to. I mean,
yeah.
Look at the history of Steelers first round draft picks. There's a lot of defense there, right? I mean, like it's not, they don't, necessarily, like, who are the big offensive free agent signings of the last 5 years? Mason Cole.
Yeah, James Daniels, Isaac Sim, all like the offensive line right now. Like, yeah,
That's it. Like, before that, though, there were no big splashy off of Eric Ebron. Like,
yeah,
I mean, they're not like that. Talk about a culture guy. Like, if George Pickens learned how to block, it might have been from Eric Ebron. Like there's, I think there is a leadership void because of the failures of this team going back for a decade. It's not like this is a 2023 Mike Tomlin problem. It is a Mike Tomlin, Kevin Colbert, Art Rooney problem in the way that they put those teams together, that there were failings and that they were not able to come up with those kind of leaders out of the. You don't have to always focus on leadership. Like, not every player needs to be a leader. There's plenty of examples of, look, I said this the other day when people were going off about the Steelers way. I was like, the same people that are going off about the Steelers way are now like furious at Rashard Mendenhall. But like, Rashard Mendenhall went to the Super Bowl with the Steelers, right? Like, I mean, he was clearly crazy then too. Like, you don't need 100% buy-in. Not everybody has to be this great leader, but you got to get enough of them. And it's very clear that over the years, the Steelers have not gotten enough of them on the offensive side of the football to get where they need to be.
Yeah. Another thought that just popped in my mind when you were talking about the defense, I was going to wait until after to ask you, but where does like a guy like Joey Porter Jr. fall in this? Obviously, he's still a very young player, but like his dad was part of these great Steelers that you're talking about. So like, where does he fall in line with that?
He's following in the footsteps of that group I named. I just didn't list him because he's a rookie, but he will be there. I feel pretty good about that. Like,
okay. Yeah, I mean, he certainly gives that off, right? But it's like wanting to see it also put to practice.
Yeah, but like, I feel good about the leadership of the defense. I feel bad about the leadership of the offense because it doesn't exist. Like, it's not. They've had to. It's a rebuild in personnel and personality, and like they restocked the cupboard on defense, right? Like, who is starting on this defense that was even on this team in 2018? Just Cam Heyward. That's it. Like, but on offense, okay. Who the draft picks were Chooks and Mason Rudolph. Well, like, that didn't work out the way you wanted it. Like, I think there's certainly it's a reflection of their own failures in talent acquisition, as much as it is a fault of Tomlin's command of the locker room or the way he treats players. Like, I think that's barking up the wrong tree. I think most of this stuff needs to be handled in the locker room, and it is on the defensive side and it isn't on the offensive side right now.
Well, you just talked about the timeline too for the defense, like saying, okay, TJ was brought in 17. Prior to that, there's nobody left besides Cam Heyward that was on this defense. And look at where they are now and all the people that you listed that exude those qualities. Because I was going to ask what type of timeline. Obviously, it's not linear. You can't say it's the exact same for the offense, but like we both, I feel like they're very clearly far away from that standpoint and having that amount of guys for this offensive side of the football. Because I was going to ask you, like, how long does it take, do you think, to get that within a locker room? Could it be just within a season or two, or like, are they still far away from having that?
I think figuring out quarterback would go a long way. I think it's really hard to have good leadership as an offense if the quarterback is not a part of it. And while I think Kenny Pickett is a good leader, right now Kenny Pickett isn't a good quarterback. And you can't be one or the other. Like, you have to be a good player to be a good leader. And if Kenny can turn out to be the guy at quarterback, I think that goes a long way to this conversation. I really do. I mean, I think that fills a significant void because I think he's a good leader. But you can't be a good leader when you're a big part of the problem.
Like, it's kind of like the same with Mason Cole, right? I mean,
right. Yeah, exactly. I think Mason Cole's a good leader. I don't think Mason Cole should be a starter. Like, you can't be a good leader and a backup. Like, it doesn't work that way. Like, and so you have to have the players that are doing it. And, maybe a guy like Broderick Jones could be that somewhere down the line, but honestly, like, I'm not sure I've seen that from his personality. You know, I think they're still in a lot of ways searching for that person. Najee Harris could be that guy who's a first round pick. I'm not sure I see it from his personality. I just don't. I think that there's a lot of misses that go beyond the X's and O's there. Even Dan Moore, like Dan Moore's been here and been starting since 2021. That's probably more starts than anybody else on this offense has with this team right now. But again, even though he's not playing, and again, not playing very well, but doesn't have the personality to lead either. Like they're 0 for 2, right? They don't have very good players, and they don't have the leaders either. Like it's a dual-pronged problem.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think it's
like if you're saying you can tell already that Joey Porter Jr. is going to be one of those leaders, right? Well, like even though the offense is young, where are the leaders? Jaylen Warren, maybe he's very quiet. I mean, but he could be one of those guys, maybe.
Yeah, to me it would be Kenny, but again, like that has to be tied with him.
Samalu is also very quiet, like he's a leader, but in a very like different way. And you need all kinds, right? You need a TJ Watt to be a maniac in the film room and on the practice field and really just show you up so badly that you're embarrassed into doing your job better, right? You need a Cam Heyward that can tell you stories and get you to relate and connect and feel the love and the passion and the connection to the team's past. And sometimes you need somebody to get in your face and kick butt, right? And I think Cam has a little bit of that. I think the Steelers team in general could use a little bit more of that. You know, there was a level of somebody did this. Somebody put this on Twitter yesterday, and they said that George Pickens isn't afraid of Mike Tomlin. And I was like, no players, 0 players in the NFL right now are afraid of their head coach. 0. None of them are afraid of him at all. They don't care. They're not physically afraid of him. They're not professionally afraid of him. There's no fear. However, there's lots of people that are afraid of other players in the locker room, right? Like there's no Joe Green on this team. There's no Jack Lambert on this team. There's no James Harrison or Greg Lloyd on this team that walks through that locker room and people shut up because he walked through that locker room, right? Like there's no one that like fear of a head coach is not going to be a thing, but fear of your teammate, yeah, that's a thing. And I'm not really seeing it from this group right now, really from anyone. And even though I think the defense in general has pretty good leadership, like I don't really see that out of any of these guys either.
Yeah. Man, it's an interesting conversation with his offense because it's just so many problems, right? It's not just like it's not one simple fix that you could say, oh, this is the issue. It's layers and layers to this. But you mentioned TJ Watt, obviously within that, and it's interesting because we've had a lot of conversations this week about like defending the Bengals offense and how they do a lot of the same things with or without Jamar Chase. See a lot of 3 receiver sets, 1 running back, 1 tight end, but TJ Watt bringing up, that they do some different stuff in terms of the utilization of their running backs. They have like 2 or 3 different guys that they like to use, including rookie Chase Brown, who offers a little bit of a different look than Joe Mixon, who's been there for so long. And Alan, you mentioned TJ Watt talking about Chase Brown and this Bengals offense and diving into that matchup. So what did he have to say about him? And honestly, it's something that we really hadn't talked about much, is the way that they use different running backs, even though it is only going to be 1 on the field.
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't a thing, right? We go back to the conversation about the differences in these teams. Chase Brown didn't play hardly at all in that first game between the Steelers and the Bengals. He's really come on as that change of pace guy. You know, they lost Samaje Perine as a free agent last offseason, and I think they didn't really know how to replace him. They have another back, Trey Henderson.
Yeah, that's not
Hendrickson, something now. Henderson, I don't know.
I think it's Henderson, but
he came in as the number 2, but they really didn't seem like they kind of knew how to use him. And it seems like Chase Brown.
Oh no, Travion Williams.
Williams. Okay, there you go. I was confusing Trey Hendrickson, who is the defensive player. Trey Williams is
and I was thinking of Travion Henderson at Ohio State. So it all
there you go. There you go. Well, it's all Ohio. That's all the same. Just if your name is Trey and you live in Ohio, we've talked about you in this podcast. There you go. So Chase Brown has really come on. He got some playing time these last few weeks, and he is much more like P. Ryan in that like third down back kind of role. I think Mixon really struggles with pass protection. I think that's the one area that I think he can be really exploited, and I think he's been better now that he's had some of that work taken off his plate by Brown. I think they're both really dangerous coming out of the backfield. It's not that Mixon can't pass block. It's that when you put him in there on like third and long, teams can bring in overload blitzes and confuse him, right? Like, it's not like he's not capable. It's that he's not necessarily just that talented at it. But, first and second down, he's good out of the backfield. Chase Brown's really good out of the backfield. And I think that has the effect of slowing down the pass rush, where like it keeps these guys from really pinning their ears back because they're worried about the screen. They're worried about getting chipped. They're worried about the little dump off in the flat. They're worried about the quarterback moving the launch point. And these are things that you do when you have better pass protection and you have running backs that are able to be multi-faceted assets in the passing game, like the way I think the Bengals have really worked Mixon and Brown. And I think they're using more of their tight ends in that sort of pretty similar role too, where it's like double team, get a chip, go on the flat, a little hook. Like they're not getting big plays with them. They're using them to keep the pass rush off Jake Browning and to make his life easier. And it's really frustrating defenses. If you watch that Minnesota game, I know it was on right before the Steelers, but I mean, Brian Flores' defense in Minnesota is pretty different than what the Steelers are doing right now. But you could just sort of see how like it was really frustrating, the Vikings defense, how they just weren't able to really get to Browning or to really impact him in a way on a down in and down out basis that they were able to. The one thing I will say is I feel like Browning in that game kind of got away with some throws I feel like the Steelers have the playmakers to make him pay for in a different way than the Vikings. I think the Vikings are a very well-run defense. I think Flo's doing a really good job, but I don't think there's like an overwhelming amount of playmaking talent on that team. I think if he's chucking up some ducks with Patrick Peterson and Joey Porter back there, or if he's running around with TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith chasing him down, the results are maybe a little bit different. And I think that's something the Steelers should. TJ was great about this yesterday. He said, look, we know they're going to do everything they can to protect him. We also know that if they do that all game, they're not going to score very many points. They're going to have to put him at risk a couple times. We just got to make sure that we capitalize on it and make the plays when they do. And if the Steelers are able to do that, I feel okay about their chances in this game, especially of being able to just limit this Cincinnati offense. I don't know about the totality, but this feels like a matchup that the Steelers defense should be able to win.
Okay, well, there we go. Let's go to that then in terms of, I don't know if there's anything else within this matchup that you want to highlight, but we, of course, have to give our predictions as this is the show before the game. So, yeah, let's just get into that, whether there's like any bold predictions you have, any certain matchup that you think you want to highlight, and then, of course, a score prediction.
I think this really is all about the Steelers offense. I do think the Steelers defense can win this matchup and win it pretty easily. I'm not as concerned about their personnel losses on the defense coming into this game. I think Eric Rowe is a pro. He can do the job. I expect we'll see Miles Jack for the first time at linebacker, and I think he'll be better than what they've gotten out of any of the other guys that we've seen there so far. I know that's putting a lot on two guys that haven't played a single down this season. I just think they'll be steadying presences because they're veterans. Like whether or not they're physically like at their peak, they're going to understand their jobs and what to do at a higher level than just filling in the next guy up off the practice squad normally involves. And I think the Steelers, especially with no Jamar Chase in the lineup, they have as much talent on defense as the Bengals have on offense easily right now. So I feel good about the Steelers defense in this matchup. I think they'll be able to hold Cincinnati to about 20 points or less. I think that's very realistic. I think the question becomes, what happens to the Steelers offense with Mason Rudolph? I think we laid out yesterday the kind of divergent paths that I see here are possible, right? If they can protect Rudolph, I think given what Cincinnati has shown to be susceptible to, the tight end stuff over the middle, while it may not necessarily line up with Rudolph's skill set in a way that makes me think this is just like a slam dunk, I certainly think he's capable of doing the things that Pickett did 4 weeks ago to pick apart this Bengals defense. But if they're unable to protect him, and while the Bengals are short on defense a little bit, they still have pretty good pass rush. Hendrickson and
Sam Hubbard.
And then coming off the edge, Mike Hilton has always been an incredible blitzer, and he really confuses pass protection with what is he coming, is he not, and so I think that's something the Steelers were struggling with when Pickett was in there, in terms of, like, you've all seen the picture of Mason Cole and James Daniels blocking each other, right? Well, that's because they were confused about who was coming and who wasn't. I think the Bengals have the ability to do that to teams. I'm really concerned about the pass rush impacting Rudolph, his ability to throw the ball, his ability to do what he wants to do, which is let routes develop down the field, try to give George and Deontay some shots, maybe get Calvin Austin involved. I don't know. I think that's going to be a tougher sell. For me, it turns to be a conservative game plan for the Steelers and the hope that the defense can really dominate. I think they're going to come up just short in that plan. I do think they'll be able to execute most of it. I just don't think the offense will be able to do quite enough. I'll say the Steelers lose in this one 20-13.
Ooh, okay. Well, I don't want to give my score yet because I have a couple things that I want to talk about, but we're kind of in the same wavelength there. But yeah, to me, this is going to be a test to see what, if anything, has this offensive coaching staff learned. Like, this is going to be a good test. We've talked about, like, other teams being able to put together plans for their backup quarterbacks. You already faced this team. You saw what worked against them. Are they going to utilize Pat Freiermuth? And, I know that, again, this maybe doesn't go towards Mason Rudolph's best strengths, but it is the best way to attack the Cincinnati defense, especially with the defensive looks that they're going to see. So I think it's going to be an interesting test, and a lot of things that we talked about this week with this offensive coaching staff not putting their players in the best positions to succeed. I think it's a good test there. Yeah, I'm kind of on the same wavelength with you, though. I think the defense is going to be able to do enough to hold them under 20. I actually had it at 17-13 Cincinnati, but both had the Steelers scoring just 13 points in this one. Too many questions for me on the offensive side of the football. I think the most intriguing thing to me about this game is going to be afterwards when I watch it back on tape. How does George Pickens look in this one when the ball's not in his hands? I want to see what he looks like run blocking.
I would be, man, like, if I was the offensive coordinator, like, I would be running right behind George all day. My response to this would be the dad who catches his kid smoking and then makes him smoke the whole pack. That's where I am with George Pickens. You want to catch the ball, I'm going to need 10 blocks from you first.
I like that analogy. Yeah.
Like, I would just run right behind him all game and make him prove that he has learned his lesson here.
And make it Jaylen Warren.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, listen, if I was the offensive coordinator, Jaylen Warren would be getting most of the carries anyway. So,
yeah, I'm in full. And that kind of just goes back to our thing again, right? Like, Najee's not on that same level of, like, bad player, what you're getting from, like, Mason Cole or the quarterback play you've gotten from Pickett. But even if he were to take on a leadership role, we have no idea what Najee's future is going to be in Pittsburgh. So, like, that, and again, could be another guy that they, doesn't get a second contract here.
Yeah.
So who knows? All right, Alan, anything else?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, it is December 22nd. So by the time that we have another episode, Alan, Christmas will have come and passed.
Yeah. We don't know we haven't made a plan for, I don't know. I guess, are we going to do one next week? I don't know. I have to figure that out.
You're right. That letting the people here behind the fourth wall, opening up the curtain, that has not been discussed. So maybe,
I don't know. We did one on Thanksgiving, and
we did,
and it was okay. Maybe we'll do something like that. I don't know. We'll have to figure that out.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll tell the people where they can find you, of course, and then I'll figure out my head.
PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com, all the stuff from this game on Saturday, yes. And then we'll go from there.
Let us know in the comments how you think this one's going to play out, how you feel about anything that we touched on. I think that was an interesting conversation that we had about the offense today, and scouting guys, talent, and their leadership qualities. Zachary Smith PGH is my account on all social media handles. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here. Like I said, hit us in the comments, leave us a 5-star review if you are listening somewhere else. Alan and I might see you again before Christmas. If not, everybody obviously have a very happy holidays. If we do see you, we'll talk to you then. All right. But either way, if you hit that notification bell, you will know when we post another afternoon drive anyways. But until next time, for Alan Saunders, for myself, thanks for jumping in, taking another ride with us on the Steelers afternoon drive.